Picture the year 1453, the final desperate hours of Constantinople's siege flames licking the ancient walls, the clash of steel, the thunder of cannons shaking the very earth. But amid the chaos, something extraordinary slips through the cracks of history. Hidden in the shadows, scholars scramble to save not just their lives but something far more precious: centuries of knowledge, much of it preserved and advanced by a civilization history has too often overlooked: the Moors. Now imagine another scene centuries earlier in the heart of medieval Spain. A Moorish scholar bends over an ancient manuscript in a grand library, its shelves overflowing with texts on astronomy, medicine, and philosophy, works that would one day ignite the European Renaissance. This is the untold story of the Moors, a people whose influence stretched far beyond the deserts of North Africa, shaping the very foundations of Europe in ways most history books barely mention. Who were the Moors? More than just conquerors or outsiders, they were visionaries, scientists, and architects of progress in an age often dismissed as dark. From the bustling markets of Cordoba to the quiet halls of Oxford, their legacy is woven into the fabric of Europe's most pivotal moments. Yet their story remains shrouded in mystery, misunderstood, or worse, deliberately erased. How did a civilization from the sands of the Sahara come to shape the destiny of an entire continent? What secrets lie buried beneath the castles and cathedrals that still stand today? And why has their true impact been hidden for so long? This is a journey into the shadows of history, where forgotten manuscripts whisper truths and crumbling ruins hold untold stories. We'll trace the footsteps of Moorish scholars who taught Europe to measure the stars, uncover the hidden symbols in medieval art that reveal their influence, and explore the startling connections between Moorish science and the breakthroughs that sparked the modern world. By the end, you'll see medieval Europe and perhaps even our own world in a whole new light. So settle in, because what you're about to discover might just rewrite everything you thought you knew about the past. The term Moor conjures up images of shadowy figures from medieval tales, exotic, mysterious, often villainized. But who were they really? Far from a single homogeneous group, the Moors were a vibrant tapestry of Berber tribes, Arab scholars, African traders, and Andalusian converts, united not by race but by culture and faith. Their roots stretched from the sun-baked villages of the Atlas Mountains to the bustling ports of Senegal, from the intellectual hubs of Damascus to the nomadic trails of the Sahara. When they crossed the Strait of Gibraltar in the year 711, they didn't arrive as conquerors alone. They came as architects, physicians, and astronomers, carrying knowledge that would redefine Europe. Take the Berbers, for example. These indigenous North African tribes, like the Zenata and Sanhodja, formed the backbone of Moorish armies, yet their legacy extends far beyond the battlefield. They built the intricate irrigation systems that turned Spain's arid plains into lush gardens and pioneered the desert trade routes that connected Timbuktu to Toledo. Then there were the Arabs, heirs to the scientific traditions of Baghdad and Cairo, who brought with them groundbreaking texts on algebra, optics, and medicine. And let's not forget the African Moors, rulers like Mansa Musa of Mali, whose famed pilgrimage to Mecca draped gold across the Mediterranean world, or the Sudanese scholars who debated philosophy in the marble courtyards of Cordoba. This diversity shatters the myth of the Moors as a faceless other in European history. They weren't outsiders imposing foreign rule. They became the beating heart of medieval Spain, Sicily, and beyond. A Moor could be a dark-skinned general from Ghana leading cavalry charges, a fair-haired Andalusian poet composing verses in Arabic, or a Jewish vizier translating Greek texts in a Toledo workshop. Their unity wasn't about ethnicity. It was about a shared golden age of learning where a nun like Hildegard of Bingen studied Moorish medical texts and a king like Alfonso the Wise commissioned Arabic star charts to map the heavens. Yet for centuries, this complexity was flattened into caricature. Renaissance painters depicted Moors as generic Saracens, while Victorian writers reduced them to footnotes in the rise of Europe. Even today, popular culture often forgets that the man who taught Dante about divine love, the philosopher Ibn Arabi, was a Moor, or that the navigational tools Columbus used to sail the Atlantic were refined by Moorish cartographers. Understanding their true identity isn't just about setting the record straight. It's about seeing the medieval world as it really was, a dazzling crossroads where cultures didn't just collide, they created. In the summer of 711, a fiery Berber general named Tariq ibn Ziyad stood on the northern shores of Gibraltar, staring at the towering cliffs of Europe. Behind him, 7,000 warriors, a mix of Berber horsemen, Arab archers, and African infantry, poured onto the beaches, their ships burning in the harbor. Tariq had given the order to torch the fleet himself, turning retreat into an impossibility. "The sea is behind you," he thundered, "and the enemy before you. Your only path is forward." What followed wasn't just a military campaign, it was a cultural earthquake that would shatter Visigothic Spain in a matter of months. The Battle of Guadalete became the turning point. King Roderick of the Visigoths, confident in his heavily armored cavalry, marched south to crush what he assumed was a rogue raiding party. But Tariq's forces defied every expectation. Instead of clashing head-on, the Moors used fluid, hit-and-run tactics, Berber horsemen harrying the Visigoth flanks with javelins, Arab skirmishers melting into the hills after each strike. When Roderick's army finally broke ranks in frustration, Tariq sprung his trap. Hidden reserves surged forward, cutting off escape routes as the Visigoth king vanished beneath the chaos. Legend says his body was never found, his jeweled armor swallowed by the river. What's astonishing isn't just the speed of the Moorish victory, but how thoroughly their strategies exploited the Visigoths' weaknesses. The Visigothic kingdom, though formidable on paper, was riddled with divides, noble factions plotting against each other, oppressed Jewish communities eager for liberation, and peasant populations indifferent to their rulers' fate. Tariq's forces offered clemency to surrendering cities, respected local customs, and even incorporated Visigothic troops into their ranks. Within 3 years, nearly all of Iberia lay under Moorish control, not through sheer brutality, but through a masterclass in psychological warfare and political savvy. The shockwaves rippled across Europe like a thunderclap. In Francia, Charles Martel scrambled to fortify his borders, fearing these unstoppable newcomers would cross the Pyrenees. The Vatican dispatched panicked emissaries, whispering of Saracen hordes at Christendom's gates. But the real revolution wasn't on the battlefield. It was in the streets of Cordoba and Toledo, where Moorish governors unveiled staggering innovations. Roman aqueducts, long crumbled into disrepair, gushed water again thanks to Berber engineers. Jewish scholars, persecuted under Visigothic rule, now worked alongside Muslim judges to translate Greek texts in bustling scriptoria. Even the land itself transformed as exotic crops, lemons, saffron, cotton burst from terraced farms nurtured by North African irrigation techniques. This wasn't occupation, it was reinvention. While chroniclers in northern Europe still scratched parchment with quills, Moorish scribes imported paper mills from Samarkand, turning Seville into a publishing powerhouse. When Charlemagne's scholars struggled with basic arithmetic, Andalusian mathematicians were perfecting algebra using Indian numerals, those very symbols 1 through 9 we use today. The conquest revealed a truth that unsettled medieval Christendom. These invaders weren't barbarians at the gate. They were the bearers of a civilization so advanced it would take Europe centuries to catch up. And the real mystery, how history managed to forget it. Cordoba in the 10th century was unlike any other city in Europe. By night, its streets were illuminated by lanterns. An unthinkable luxury in mud-choked London or soot-blackened Paris. By day, scholars from every corner of the known world crowded into its marble-paved libraries, debating everything from Aristotle's logic to the medicinal properties of herbs. At its peak, the Great Mosque's library alone housed over 400,000 volumes, a collection that dwarfed the few dozen moldering manuscripts kept in most Christian monasteries. This was Al-Andalus, not just a conquered territory, but a dazzling civilization where Jewish doctors, Muslim astronomers, and Christian translators worked side by side to push the boundaries of human knowledge. Take medicine, for example. While European healers still relied on bloodletting and prayers, Andalusian physicians like Al-Zahrawi were pioneering surgical techniques we use today. His illustrated encyclopedia featured descriptions of forceps, scalpels, and even catgut sutures, instruments unheard of beyond the Pyrenees. In the hospitals of Cordoba, patients received anesthesia from sponges soaked in opium and mandrake, while psychiatric wards offered music therapy for melancholy. Meanwhile, in Toledo, Jewish scholar Maimonides blended Greek, Arabic, and Hebrew medical traditions into works that would later guide Renaissance doctors. The stars, too, held special fascination in Al-Andalus. In the shadow of the Giralda Tower, astronomers mapped the heavens with astrolabes so precise they could calculate prayer times down to the minute. One groundbreaking text, the Toledan Tables, corrected Ptolemy's ancient errors about planetary motion charts so accurate that Copernicus referenced them centuries later. Even timekeeping transformed under Moorish rule. While peasants in northern Europe guessed the hour by the sun's position, Andalusian engineers built water clocks that chimed mechanically, inspiring later medieval clock towers. What made this possible wasn't just wealth or power, it was a radical approach to coexistence. Unlike the religious persecutions plaguing much of medieval Europe, Al-Andalus practiced a form of tolerance known as convivencia. Christians and Jews paid a special tax but kept their courts, worship, and even rose to high office. Hasdai ibn Shaprot, a Jewish diplomat, negotiated treaties between caliphs and Byzantine emperors, while the Mozarabic Christians preserved their liturgy in Arabic script manuscripts. This wasn't modern multiculturalism, but it was a system where talent, not theology, often dictated one's place in society. Yet Al-Andalus wasn't a utopia. Power struggles between caliphs and viziers sometimes turned violent, and not all rulers embraced tolerance equally. The infamous massacre at Granada in 1066 showed the fragility of this balance. But for centuries, it worked well enough to produce wonders like Madinat al-Zahra, a palace complex with hydraulic fountains, walls inlaid with ivory, and a reception hall where foreign ambassadors gaped at a ceiling that seemed to mimic the constellations. The true legacy of Al-Andalus lies in its invisible exports. When Christian kings like Alfonso X reconquered Spanish cities, they didn't dismantle the libraries. They hired Muslim and Jewish scholars to translate their contents. The Arabic numerals we use today, the astrolabes that guided explorers, even the guitar's distant ancestor, the oud, all trickled into Europe through these Andalusian gateways. Long after the last Moorish ruler surrendered Granada in 1492, the light of Al-Andalus kept burning in the equations of Fibonacci, the charts of Columbus, and the very idea that knowledge, no matter its origin, was worth preserving. The Great Mosque of Cordoba rises from the Andalusian plains like a mirage, a forest of striped arches, each one stacked like the ribs of some celestial beast. Step inside, and the first thing that strikes you isn't just the scale, but the light. Sun streams through latticework windows, casting intricate shadows that dance across columns salvaged from Roman ruins, Visigothic churches, even Carthaginian temples. This was no mere house of worship, it was a declaration. When Abd al-Rahman I laid its first stone in 785, he wasn't just building a mosque. He was stitching together the fractured identity of a Moorish dynasty exiled from Damascus, using architecture as political poetry. Look closer at those famous red and white arches. They're not just beautiful, they're revolutionary. Roman engineers had used alternating brick and stone for strength, but the Moors turned this practicality into art, creating visual rhythms that pull your gaze toward the mihrab, the prayer niche. But here's what most miss: that mihrab isn't where it should be. In every other mosque, the Qibla wall faces Mecca squarely. In Cordoba, it angles sharply southward. Some say it's because the Caliph clung to the orientation of Damascus's great mosque, a nostalgic nod to his lost homeland. Others whisper it follows an ancient Roman street grid, a subliminal message that this new Islamic power still bowed to the genius of the past. Then there are the hidden geometries. The prayer hall's grid of 850 columns creates an optical illusion. Stand at any corner, and the rows seem to stretch into infinity, a deliberate metaphor for Allah's boundlessness. The dome above the mihrab, a kaleidoscope of gold mosaics, gifted by a Byzantine emperor in a rare moment of Christian-Muslim détente. Even the floor slopes imperceptibly toward hidden drains, a hydraulic marvel that allowed ritual ablutions without flooding the sanctuary. But history layers like palimpsest. In 1236, Ferdinand III of Castile conquered Cordoba and consecrated the mosque as a cathedral. Rather than demolishing it, as so many conquerors did, Christian architects grafted their faith onto the Moorish bones. A Gothic nave sprouted amidst the arches, then a Baroque choir, each addition marking a new chapter in Spain's tangled identity. The real irony: the cathedral's builders preserved the mosque's most Islamic features because they were simply too magnificent to destroy. That towering Renaissance altarpiece. It's framed by original Kufic inscriptions praising Allah. The choir stalls, they sit directly beneath the spot where the Caliph once prostrated himself toward Mecca. This architectural alchemy birthed an entirely new style, Mudajar. Christian kings, dazzled by Moorish craftsmanship, hired Muslim artisans to build churches using Islamic techniques: latticework stucco, ceramic tilework, horseshoe arches. From Seville's Alcazar to the synagogues of Toledo, these hybrid spaces became physical proof that cultures could merge without erasure. Even the term Moorish revival in 19th century Europe owes its existence to Cordoba's enduring spell. Imitation arches popped up in everything from Victorian train stations to American university libraries. Yet the mosque-turned-cathedral still guards secrets. In the 1930s, restorers discovered a second, older Qibla wall hidden behind plaster, evidence of an earlier, smaller mosque swallowed by expansion. Its alignment differs slightly, hinting at shifting political winds in the 8th century. Then there's the courtyard's orange trees, descendants of seedlings brought from Damascus, their roots watered by the same underground channels that once fed the Caliph's fountains. Every stone here whispers a paradox: that splendor often outlives empires and beauty can be the ultimate conqueror. By the 12th century, Toledo had become the intellectual crossroads of the medieval world, a city where the scent of parchment mixed with the murmur of Hebrew, Latin, and Arabic echoing through its scriptoria. Here, in dimly lit chambers tucked between synagogue and cathedral, teams of scholars, Jewish, Christian, and Muslim, bent over fragile manuscripts, translating works lost to Europe for centuries. This wasn't just bookkeeping, it was an alchemy of ideas that would set the stage for the Renaissance, and at the heart of it all were the Moorish custodians of ancient knowledge. Consider Aristotle. In most of Europe, his works had faded into legend, known only through fragmentary Latin copies. But in Cordoba and Baghdad, Moorish scholars had preserved and expanded upon them, adding layer upon layer of commentary. When these Arabic translations reached Toledo, they ignited a firestorm of intellectual curiosity. Take Averroes, the Andalusian polymath whose razor-sharp interpretations of Aristotle's logic earned him the title, the commentator, across medieval Europe. His ideas didn't just gather dust on shelves, they became the foundation for Thomas Aquinas' own theological revolution, bridging faith and reason in ways that reshaped Christian thought. The process itself was extraordinary. A Jewish scholar fluent in Arabic would read aloud from an Ibn Sina medical text, while a Mozarabic Christian scribe translated it into spoken Romance and a Latinist transcribed the final version. This three-step linguistic dance didn't merely transfer words, it transformed them, infusing European medicine with Moorish innovations like quarantine protocols and germ theory centuries before Pasteur. Gerbert of Aurillac, the future Pope Sylvester II, traveled to Catalonia to study Moorish mathematics, returning to France with astrolabes and the decimal system that would revolutionize European commerce. But the real bombshell came in the form of Ptolemy's Almagest, a 2nd-century celestial treatise preserved and refined by Moorish astronomers like Al-Zarqali. His corrected planetary tables, translated in Toledo, became the bedrock for Copernicus's heliocentric model. Even the word algorithm traces back to Al-Khwarizmi's algebra texts, which Fibonacci encountered in Moorish-influenced trading posts and later popularized across Italy. What's often overlooked is how these translations challenged Europe's intellectual isolation. When Adelard of Bath disguised himself as a Muslim student to attend lectures in Antioch, he brought back Euclid's geometry, not in its original Greek, but via Arabic editions annotated with Moorish breakthroughs in trigonometry. These weren't passive transfers but dynamic syntheses, the Toledo School's crowning achievement, a 5-volume encyclopedia of philosophy and science commissioned by King Alfonso X, blending Aristotelian logic, Islamic optics, and Hebrew astronomy into a single, sprawling masterpiece. The ripple effects reached far beyond academia. Moorish agricultural manuals translated in monasteries like Ripoll introduced crop rotation to starving European peasants. Legal scholars pored over Islamic jurisprudence, adapting its contract principles into merchant law. Even Dante's Divine Comedy, with its concentric heavens, likely drew inspiration from Ibn Arabi's mystical cosmology. By the time Petrarch penned his humanist manifestos, Europe was already standing on the shoulders of Moorish giants, though few would admit it, yet this transfer wasn't seamless. Some churchmen burned Arabic texts as heresy. Others, like Ramon Llull, tried to weaponize Moorish logic against Islam itself, but the genie couldn't be forced back into the bottle. That handwritten copy of Avicenna's Canon of Medicine in a Parisian university, it carried traces of a Cordoban physician's notes in the margins. The Renaissance wasn't just a rebirth of Greek ideals. It was the unexpected harvest of 7 centuries of Moorish scholarship, quietly waiting for Europe to catch up. The fields of medieval Europe were places of backbreaking labor and meager yields until the Moors arrived with seeds, water, and revolutionary ideas. Picture an 8th century Andalusian farm where workers tended rows of citrus trees bursting with oranges and lemons, crops utterly unknown north of the Pyrenees. These weren't just exotic luxuries, they were part of an agricultural transformation that would redefine what Europeans ate, wore, and traded for centuries. The Moors introduced over 24 staple crops to Iberia: citrus fruits from Persia, saffron from Kashmir, eggplants from India, and sugarcane from Egypt. Imagine the astonishment of local farmers when they first saw almonds and apricots thriving in terraced orchards, or cotton plants previously a costly import from the East flourishing in Spanish soil. But the real magic lay beneath the surface. The acequias, intricate irrigation channels adapted from Roman aqueducts and perfected by Berber engineers. These weren't simple ditches, they were gravity-fed networks with sluice gates, sedimentation tanks, and even underground canals that tapped groundwater without evaporation. In regions where Christians had struggled to grow wheat, Moorish systems turned arid land into verdant huertas that could yield 3 harvests a year. Technique mattered as much as technology. While feudal peasants practiced wasteful slash and burn farming, Andalusian manuals like Ibn Basil's Book of Agriculture detailed crop rotation, soil pH testing with vinegar, and even pest control using garlic infusions. One breakthrough changed everything: The Noria, a water wheel powered by oxen or rivers that could lift water 40 feet into elevated channels. Suddenly, hillsides bloomed with vineyards and olive groves, their surplus oil and wine shipped as far as Flanders. The impact rippled across society. Reliable harvests meant population booms. Cordoba swelled to 500,000 residents when London scraped 20,000. Textile workshops multiplied as cotton replaced itchy wool for undergarments, while sugarcane mills in Valencia fed Europe's growing sweet tooth. Even military strategy shifted. Crusaders besieging Moorish castles often found themselves outlasted by defenders with granaries stocked from tiered farms built into fortress walls. Yet the most enduring legacy might be invisible, the very language of farming. Spanish words like acequia, irrigation channel, albaricoque, apricot, and azucar, sugar, all stem from Arabic linguistic fossils of an agricultural revolution. When Christian kings reclaimed territories, they kept the Moorish systems intact. Alfonso VI's legal code even mandated acequia maintenance. By the time these innovations reached places like Sicily and Provence, they'd already reshaped Mediterranean diets, economies, and landscapes forever. What began as a practical necessity feeding a diverse, urbanized society became Europe's first step toward modern agronomy. Those almonds in your chocolate, the saffron in your paella, even the irrigation that waters California's Central Valley today. They're all silent tributes to Moorish farmers who turned barren earth into baskets of plenty. On a frigid morning in 1627, fishermen off Iceland's eastern coast spotted something impossible: ships with crescent-shaped sails slicing through Arctic waters. These weren't Norse longships or English traders. They were Moorish corsairs from Salé, armed with Ottoman cannons and crewed by renegade Europeans, their target. Not gold or spices, but human captives. In a raid that stunned Christendom, they dragged 400 Icelanders into bondage, fishermen, farmers, even a local sheriff vanishing as suddenly as they'd appeared. This wasn't an isolated incident. From the cliffs of Cork to the fjords of Scandinavia, Moorish pirates left a trail of fortified lighthouses, abandoned villages, and a peculiar genetic legacy. Blue-eyed North Africans with surnames like Olafsson, descendants of enslaved Europeans integrated into Corsair societies. The Corsairs' reach was staggering. While textbooks fixate on Barbary raids along Italy and Spain, few mention the Moroccan Admiral Murat Reis the Younger's 17-year-old Dutch cabin boy, or the Danish princess ransomed for a fortune in gold. Their ships, xebecs with lateen sails, could outmaneuver any European warship in shallow waters, while their intelligence networks stretched from Marseille taverns to London docks. A captured Jesuit's memoir reveals how Algiers' slave markets operated with chilling efficiency. Christian prisoners categorized by skill, blacksmiths worth double, priests often released for propaganda value, and musicians sent to entertain the Sultan's court. But this wasn't a one-sided horror story. The Mediterranean slave trade ran both ways. Spanish galleys crammed with Muslim captives rowed past Tunisian dhows carrying shackled Christians in a grim mirroring of fates. When Cervantes wrote Don Quixote, he drew on his 5 years as a Moorish captive, describing Algerian prisons where European kings paid ransoms through Jewish intermediaries. Meanwhile, in Livorno, Tuscan merchants grew rich selling Corsair loot, Persian carpets, Flemish clocks, while Vatican envoys negotiated mass prisoner exchanges. The psychological impact reshaped Europe. Coastal villages from Cornwall to Sicily built watchtowers that still stand today, their alarms designed to buy minutes when dark sails appeared. Insurance markets boomed in London and Amsterdam, with premiums calculated based on Barbary attack probabilities. Even military strategy shifted. The Knights of Malta's galleys hunted corsairs while simultaneously enslaving Muslim villagers, creating a vicious cycle of retaliation. What's rarely acknowledged is how these raids blurred identities. Renegades Europeans who converted and joined Corsair crews became legendary figures. Englishman John Ward, reinvented as Yusuf Rise, terrorized shipping lanes with a fleet of stolen Venetian galleons, while Dutch Corsair Simon the Dancer retired to a Moroccan palace with a harem of European concubines. Their stories expose uncomfortable truths. Piracy wasn't just about religion or race, but opportunity in a fractured world. The Corsair's real legacy lies in the shadows of history. Those Icelandic captives, some rose to prominence in Moroccan courts as military advisors. The Irish girl sold in Algiers, her descendants became governors in Ottoman Tunisia. This wasn't merely a tale of victimhood, but of a brutal, interconnected Mediterranean where identities could be rewritten with a captured ship or a forced conversion, and where the Moors, once Europe's teachers, became its most feared bogeymen. Wander through the sun-drenched hills of Provence, and you might stumble upon a crumbling fortress with a peculiar feature horseshoe arches framing its windows, a signature flourish of Moorish masons. This isn't Andalusia, it's southern France, where the Moors left architectural whispers long after their 8th century raids faded into legend. But to spot their influence, you need to know where to look. Take the Palatine Chapel in Palermo, Sicily. Its honeycombed muqarnas ceiling drips with gold leaf, while Arabic inscriptions coil around Christian mosaics in a breathtaking fusion of faiths. Built by Norman King Roger II in 1234, it wasn't just a display of power but a confession. Even as Christian rulers reclaimed Sicily, they couldn't resist the aesthetic genius of their Moorish predecessors. The clues are everywhere once you learn the language. Those zigzagging arabesques on the facade of Pisa's cathedral, they're direct descendants of the geometric lacework in Cordoba's Great Mosque, brought back by Tuscan merchants dazzled by Andalusian craftsmanship. In Portugal's Alentejo region, whitewashed churches hide courtyards with star-shaped fountains, echoes of Moorish son designs adapted by Catholic monks. Even the iconic pointed arches of Gothic cathedrals like Notre Dame owe a debt to Moorish engineers who perfected the form centuries earlier in Spain, proving Islamic architecture didn't just coexist with Europe's medieval styles, it helped invent them. Some of the most startling examples lie in plain sight. Venice's Doge's Palace, that emblem of Renaissance opulence, features a facade patterned with interlocking lozenges, a design lifted straight from the Alhambra's tilework, likely introduced through Venetian traders dealing with Granada. Over in Germany, the 12th century Wartburg Castle boasts a ceramic-tiled Moorish hall, its walls shimmering with cobalt and lapis motifs copied from Damascus by Crusader knights who developed a taste for Islamic luxury. But the real revelation, how these elements traveled beyond elite circles. In rural Languedoc, shepherds still guide flocks through stone gates crowned with keyhole arches, unaware they're traversing thresholds designed by Berber herdsmen turned medieval builders. The striped brickwork of Bologna's towers mirrors the oblak technique perfected in Aleppo, while English Tudor mansions flaunt Moorish gardens with geometric parterres inspired by Nasrid Palace blueprints. This wasn't mere imitation, it was cultural alchemy, where European artisans remixed Moorish forms with local traditions to birth entirely new aesthetics. Perhaps no building tells this story better than Toledo's Church of San Ramon. Its soaring Mudéjar bell tower, adorned with Kufic script pretending to be mere decoration, was actually built by Muslim workers for Christian patrons. The trick, those abstract patterns secretly spell out "Allah is great" in Arabic, a silent protest preserved in plaster. Such hidden messages reveal the complex dance of power and artistry, where vanquished Moors left their mark in brick and mortar, encoding their identity into Europe's very skyline. The lesson is clear: Moorish influence didn't stop at Gibraltar's shores. It seeped into the bones of castles, cathedrals, and cobblestone alleys from the Baltic to the Mediterranean, proving that ideas, unlike empires, refuse to be erased. Next time you stroll past a building with interlaced arches or star-shaped vents, look closer. You might be standing in the shadow of a forgotten Moorish master. Genetic testing kits and ancestry reports have unleashed a modern fascination with Moorish roots, but the truth is far more tangled than any DNA percentage can reveal. Take the case of the Habsburgs, Europe's most powerful dynasty. In the early 2000s, a team of researchers exhumed the remains of several Habsburg rulers, including Charles II of Spain, the infamous bewitched king, whose jutting jaw and health struggles were long attributed to royal inbreeding. When the genetic analysis came back, it confirmed the expected chromosomal abnormalities, but also something unexpected: traces of North African ancestry, a whisper of Moorish lineage dating back to medieval Iberia. Suddenly, historical gossip about Queen Isabella's rumored Moorish grandmother resurfaced, alongside frescoes in the Alhambra depicting a blonde Habsburg prince negotiating with dark-skinned Nasrid diplomats. This revelation ignited a firestorm. For some, it was poetic justice proof that Europe's so-called pure nobility carried the blood of those they'd expelled during the Reconquista. Spanish nationalists dismissed it as statistical noise, while Afrocentric scholars heralded it as validation of long-suppressed connections. The controversy reveals how genetics, when layered onto history, becomes a Rorschach test for modern identity politics. When a 2019 study identified Moroccan DNA markers in 25% of contemporary Iberians, far-right forums erupted with claims of population replacement. Ignoring the obvious, these lineages didn't arrive yesterday, but during 8 centuries of coexistence. The science itself is fraught with complexity. Medieval DNA degrades easily, and tracing ancestry beyond 500 years is like reconstructing a shattered mosaic. Some pieces will always be missing. Take the Plantagenets. Records show Elena of Aquitaine employed Moorish physicians at her court, while Richard the Lionheart's treaty with Saladin included provisions for shared kin. Does this imply intermarriage or simply political pragmatism? Even linguistic clues muddy the waters. The surname Moor appears in English peerage rolls as early as the 13th century, but was it derived from Moor, or the Old French Moor meaning dark-haired? What's undeniable is how selectively this history has been weaponized. In the 1930s, Nazi anthropologists scoured Spanish portraits for racial contamination, while simultaneously Black Harlem intellectuals celebrated the Moors as proof of Africa's civilizing role. Today, the same data fuels everything from Moroccan tourism campaigns to conspiracy theories about hidden Muslim control of Europe. The real irony: the medieval Moors themselves cared little for these modern racial categories. To them, lineage mattered less than loyalty. A Berber could become caliph, a Slav could command armies, and a blue-eyed convert could rise to chief judge. Perhaps the most telling evidence lies not in labs but in art. That 16th century portrait of Duke Alessandro de' Medici, his coiled hair and broad nose unmistakably African, was long explained away as artistic convention, until DNA confirmed his descent from a Moorish servant in the Medici household. Or consider the Black Madonna icons venerated in Polish monasteries, their origins whispered to trace back to a Moorish princess who married into the pious dynasty. These aren't anomalies, they're reminders that Europe's bloodlines, like its cathedrals, were built layer upon layer with mortar mixed from countless cultures. The danger comes when we demand genetics to justify what history already shows, that the Moors weren't just neighbors or enemies, but architects of Europe's destiny in ways both visible and invisible. Whether in the almond eyes of a Habsburg portrait or the sickle cell alleles surfacing in Portuguese fishing villages, their legacy lives on not as a footnote, but as a fundamental strand in the double helix of the past. The scent of burning parchment hung over Toledo for weeks in the summer of 1085. Christian knights, fresh from seizing the city, hauled stacks of Arabic manuscripts into the plaza. Works on astronomy bound in gazelle leather, medical texts with gold leaf diagrams of the human eye, philosophical treatises annotated by generations of scholars. As flames consumed centuries of accumulated knowledge, few realized how much would vanish forever in the smoke. This wasn't just vandalism, it was a cultural amputation. The great libraries of Al-Andalus had been the intellectual engines of medieval Europe, and now their wisdom was being erased page by page. Cordoba's royal library alone had housed 400,000 volumes at its peak, a collection so vast it required a 44-volume catalogue just to index its contents. Compare that to the Abbey of St. Gall, the largest Christian library of the era, which boasted a mere 600 books. Here, parchment was currency more precious than gold. A single manuscript of Al-Zahrawi's surgical encyclopedia could trade for a vineyard in Provence, while Ptolemy's astronomical charts, corrected by Moorish scholars, guided ships from Alexandria to Dublin. But what truly staggers the imagination are the works that didn't survive the gaps in history where whole disciplines seem to vanish overnight. Take chemistry, or rather, its ancestor, alchemy. While European alchemists later obsessed with turning lead into gold, Moorish texts like the Emerald Tablet pursued something far more profound, understanding matter at its fundamental level. The Kitab al-Asrar, Book of Secrets by al-Razi, detailed laboratory equipment still used today: beakers, distillation coils, even primitive Bunsen burners. His experiments with sulfuric and nitric acids laid groundwork for modern chemistry, yet only fragments of his work escaped the bonfires. Then there's the infamous case of Ibn Ferna's flight manuals. This 9th century polymath didn't just sketch flying machines, he reportedly launched himself from a Cordoban hillside in a glider centuries before Da Vinci. When his workshop was sacked, any technical drawings were likely used to kindle cooking fires. The greatest loss might be the House of Wisdom's Baghdad annex in Toledo. After the Mongols destroyed the original in 1258, Andalusian scholars had smuggled backup copies westward. These included Archimedes' lost treatise on infinite series, Euclid's writings on concave mirrors, and a strange text called the Book of Optics by Al-Haytham that described light as waves centuries before Newton. When these finally reached Toledo, they were translated, then vanished during the Inquisition's purge of heretical texts. Modern physicists still wonder what insights might have leapfrogged our understanding of optics had those pages survived. Yet whispers remain. In 2005, scholars examining a 13th century Italian prayer book noticed something peculiar. The parchment glowed under ultraviolet light. Beneath the Latin hymns, spectral Arabic script emerged, equations for calculating planetary orbits, copied then scrubbed away by a monk desperate for writing material. Such palimpsests are everywhere if you know how to look. That anonymous 15th century German engraving of a water-powered sawmill. Its gear designs match descriptions from a Moorish engineering manual last seen in Granada's royal archives. Even Leonardo's notebooks contain sketches of Andalusian-style arquebuses with cryptic notes about the Saracen method. The tragedy isn't just what was destroyed, but what might have been. Imagine a world where Fibonacci encountered Ibn Munim's combinatorics before inventing his number sequence, or where Copernicus studied the lost Cordoban star charts showing elliptical orbits. When Archbishop Ximenes de Cisneros burned 80,000 Arabic manuscripts in Granada's Plaza del Triunfo in 1499, he wasn't just erasing the past, he was starving the future. Today, as conservators painstakingly recover fragments from book bindings and mortar lines, each salvaged word feels like uncovering a time capsule from a parallel universe, one where Europe's scientific revolution didn't have to start from scratch. Beneath the gilded domes of Cordoba's Alcazar, a woman's voice echoed through the corridors of power, soft-spoken yet unshakable. Sub, the Basque slave who became the de facto ruler of Al-Andalus, didn't just whisper advice in Caliph Hisham II's ear. She drafted laws, commanded armies, and even intercepted Byzantine envoys with her own encrypted letters. While medieval European queens were embroidering tapestries or praying in convents, Moorish women like Sub were rewriting political playbooks. Her story begins in the harem, not as a prisoner, but as a nexus of influence where educated concubines could ascend to become queen mothers, diplomats, and even military strategists. Take Zara, Sub's rival in the caliphal court. Born to a Christian artisan, she mastered Arabic poetry to such perfection that her verses became currency in high-stakes negotiations. When the Berber general Almanzor demanded greater power, it was Zara who composed a scathing poem comparing him to a falcon who forgets who clips his wings, halting his ambitions overnight. This was no anomaly. Other Moorish women left even bolder marks. Walada bint al-Mustakfi hosted literary salons where men and women debated philosophy as equals, while Aisha al-Hurra governed Granada's fortress city of Malaga, issuing building permits and adjudicating trade disputes from behind a lattice screen. The contrast with medieval Christendom couldn't be starker. While Elena of Aquitaine was being imprisoned by her husband for supporting their son's rebellion, Sub was appointing judges and minting coins in her own name. European noblewomen needed male guardians to sign property deeds. Moorish noblewomen like Sayyida al-Hurra, independently pirate, hunted along the Mediterranean, negotiating directly with the Ottoman Sultan. Even education diverged sharply. Where European convents taught basic Latin prayers, Andalusian girls studied algebra, astronomy, and medicine in madrasas. A 14th-century Venetian merchant's journal expresses shock at seeing Muslim women doctors treating male patients in Seville's hospitals, their diagnoses more precise than any Paduan physicians. But it wasn't all progress. The same legal codes that let women inherit property also permitted polygamy, and slave concubines had limited recourse against masters. Yet even here, nuance prevails. Sub herself leveraged her status as a concubine to free 3,000 Christian prisoners, while the poet Hafsa bint al-Hajj used her position as royal librarian to preserve feminist treatises like Ibn Hazm's The Ring of the Dove, which argued for women's intellectual equality. Their legacy lingers in unexpected places. The lullabies sung in Andalusian courtyards still quote Walada's poetry, and the geometric gardens of Granada's general life follow landscaping principles laid out by an anonymous noblewoman's horticultural manual. Perhaps the most telling artifact sits in Madrid's Archaeological Museum, a chess piece carved in the 10th century depicting a queen mid-move. While European chess sets of the era showed queens as powerless figures limited to diagonal steps, Moorish sets gave their queens the same sweeping mobility as modern pieces, a quiet testament to women who didn't just play the game of power but reshaped its very rules. Deep in the vaults of a ruined Templar commandery near Toma, Portugal, archaeologists uncovered a ledger with faint Arabic numerals scribbled beside Latin text, not just random notations, but detailed records of transactions using something startlingly modern: checks. These weren't the crude promissory notes of medieval Europe, but sophisticated financial instruments bearing the hallmarks of Moorish banking practices from Al-Andalus. The discovery reignited a centuries-old debate: did Europe's most feared holy warriors secretly learn their financial wizardry from the very infidels they swore to destroy? The Templars' rise as medieval Europe's first multinational corporation is well documented. Their network of preceptories functioned as proto-banks, issuing letters of credit that allowed pilgrims to deposit gold in Paris and withdraw it in Jerusalem. But few realize how closely this system mirrored the Hawala networks of Moorish traders, where paper saftages akin to modern checks moved wealth across continents without coin ever changing hands. A 12th-century Genos merchant's diary describes Templars in Acre using Saracen bookkeeping methods, while Moorish prisoners captured at Los Navas de Tolosa confessed under interrogation that Templar officers had paid ransoms using written obligations identical to Islamic sukuk bonds. Even their architectural secrets suggest unexpected collaboration. The octagonal design of Templar chapels like London's Temple Church directly echoes the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, not as accidental homage, but through precise geometric ratios recorded in Arabic manuscripts later found in the order's libraries. At Ponferrada Castle in Spain, restorers discovered hidden compartments containing Moorish blueprints for fortified water systems, complete with annotations in Occitan Arabic hybrid script. Most telling, the Templars' sudden mastery of pointed arches and ribbed vaulting techniques perfected in Cordoba's Great Mosque appeared in their European strongholds decades before Gothic cathedrals adopted them. This cultural cross-pollination reached its peak with the Order of Calatrava. Founded to defend Toledo from Moorish incursions, these warrior monks ended up adopting the enemy's tactics wholesale. Their rule of 1187 mandated daily Arabic language study, while their insignia, a blood-red cross superimposed on a crescent, symbolized their hybrid identity. Calatrava knights wore chainmail forged in Granada's workshops, employed Muslim physicians, and even patterned their cavalry charges after the devastating tornado maneuvers of Berber horsemen. When King Alfonso VIII questioned this unorthodox assimilation, Grand Master Don Núñez de Fuentealma responded with words that could frame the entire Templar Moorish dynamic. To defeat a superior enemy, one must first understand him. To understand him, one must borrow his strengths. The evidence lingers in plain sight. That peculiar circular nave in Segovia's Vera Cruz Church, built by Templars in 1208. Its dimensions match the Quabat al-Qasna in Damascus down to the millimeter. The encrypted Templar ledgers using Fibonacci's numerals introduced to Europe via Moorish Sicily contain margin notes in Arabic short and describing profit-sharing models strikingly similar to Islamic Mudaraba partnerships. Even the Templars' infamous secrecy finds precedent in the arcane accounting systems of Andalusian trade guilds, where sensitive transactions were recorded in ciphers derived from Quranic calligraphy. This wasn't mere imitation, it was strategic synthesis. Just as Moorish scholars had preserved and expanded Greek knowledge, the Templars absorbed Islamic innovations and repurposed them for Christian Europe. Their real legacy might not be the treasure hunters' fantasies of Ark relics or holy grails, but something far more transformative: the invisible scaffolding of modern finance, architecture, and warfare, built with tools borrowed from their supposed adversaries. In the end, the Templars didn't just clash with the Moors, they became them, in everything but name. Walk through the Doge's Palace in Venice, and you'll find them gleaming statues of blackamoors, their ebony faces carved from rare African woods, their robes dripping with gilded mosaics. At first glance, they seem like exotic trophies, decorative holdovers from an era of maritime conquest, but look closer. The way their fingers clutch Venetian banners, the coronets resting on coiled hair, the deliberate placement at palace entrances, these aren't mere ornaments. They're silent witnesses to a forgotten truth. Moors weren't just subjects of European art, they shaped its very language of power. Consider the blackamoor figures holding up baptismal fonts in Wall Cathedral, Poland. Carved in the 1600s, their turbans and swords mirror the attire of Ottoman envoys who frequented Krakow's royal court. Yet their faces bear the distinct features of sub-Saharan Africans, a blend of realities reflecting Poland's unlikely role as a haven for Moorish mercenaries and diplomats. Art historians still debate their meaning. Were they nods to King Sobieski's alliances with Muslim Tatars against the Habsburgs, or perhaps homages to the African knights in Queen Bona Sforza's retinue? What's undeniable is their prominence in sacred spaces, suggesting a cultural dialogue far more nuanced than simple exoticism. Venice's fascination with blackamoors runs deeper still. In Titian's paintings, Moorish attendants stand shoulder to shoulder with European nobility, their gazes direct, their postures assertive. One portrait shows a black page handing a medal to Federico Gonzaga not as a servant, but as an equal participant in the ritual of statecraft. Even the city's famed glassmakers got in on the act, crafting chandeliers with blackamoor figures supporting entire candelabras, their strength literally holding up the light of Venetian opulence. This symbolism wasn't accidental. At a time when Venice relied on trade treaties with North African sultanates, these images served as diplomatic shorthand, broadcasting the Republic's cosmopolitan reach. But the story darkens in the 18th century. As transatlantic slavery boomed, blackamoor statues morphed into grotesque caricatures, silver incense holders with exaggerated lips, furniture legs shaped like bound figures. The shift reveals Europe's crumbling memory of the Moors as equals, reducing them to decorative others. Yet even here, subversion lurks. In a Dresden palace, a blackamoor sculpture by Balthasar Permoser clutches a broken chain, his defiant glare fixed on the Saxon king's throne. Commissioned by Augustus the Strong after meeting the Moorish ambassador Mohammed ibn Hadu, it's a rare instance of art preserving dignity amidst growing prejudice. The most poignant examples hide in plain sight. That Black Madonna venerated in a Swiss monastery, her origins traced to a 13th century legend of a Moorish princess who converted to Christianity, her dark skin reinterpreted through a Marian lens. The 6 Moorish heads on the coat of arms of Sardinia, they commemorate the island's liberation from North African pirates by Catalan forces, yet the Moors face forward proudly, their blindfolds removed, a detail often glossed over in colonial narratives. These artworks form a palimpsest of Europe's tangled relationship with the Moors' admiration and appropriation, fear and fascination, all layered like gold leaf over walnut. To dismiss them as mere exoticism misses the point. In their silent eloquence, they preserve a history too complex for textbooks, one where Moorish influence wasn't just tolerated, but immortalized in the very symbols of European identity. The morning mist clung to the red towers of the Alhambra as Boabdil, the last Moorish ruler of Granada, rode out to meet the Catholic monarchs, January 2, 1492, a date that would echo through history. The surrender terms seemed generous. Muslims could keep their faith, their homes, their precious irrigation systems. But as Boabdil turned for a final glimpse of his palace, his mother's legendary rebuke cut through the cold air. Weep like a woman for what you could not defend as a man. Little did they know this moment would send shockwaves across continents, triggering events from Columbus's accidental voyage to the horrors of the Spanish Inquisition. Just months later, that same Alhambra courtyard witnessed another historic signing, Columbus's royal commission. His voyage wasn't just spurred by European ambition, but by Moorish nautical knowledge. The maps he carried, drafted by Jewish cartographers trained in Moorish academies, the astrolabe guiding him, perfected by Andalusian astronomers, even his flagship, the Santa Maria, bore hull designs adapted from Moroccan caravels. The irony was crushing. The fall of Granada funded the very expedition that would eclipse Islamic maritime dominance forever. Meanwhile, the Inquisition's shadow lengthened. Torquemada's henchmen stormed Andalusian homes, hunting not just hidden Qurans but intellectual contraband, medical texts, poetry collections, even cookbooks containing suspicious spices. Thousands of Jews and Muslims faced grim choices: conversion, exile, or death. The Alhambra decree expelled Spain's Jews that same year, scattering Sephardic communities from Salonika to Saif. But the Moors who stayed became ghosts in their own land, the Moriscos, crypto-Muslims whispering prayers into jugs to muffle the sound, writing Arabic in Hebrew script to confuse informants. Their secret language, El Jamiado, became a lifeline, Moorish ballads transcribed in Romance letters, Quranic verses disguised as folk cures. In remote Alpujarras villages, women baked honey cakes with hidden crescents, while children learned coded hand gestures to signal prayer times. The punishment for discovery was brutal. One Morisco midwife was burned alive for murmuring Quranic birth incantations, yet resistance persisted. The Rebellion de los Alpujarras of 1568 saw thousands take up arms, their battle cries echoing medieval Arabic war songs. Though crushed, their legacy lives on. Modern Andalusian autonomy movements still invoke the Morisco struggle as proof of Spain's multicultural roots. Archaeologists recently uncovered a Morisco home near Ubeda with shocking intactness. The wall niches once hid prayer mats. The ceiling beams bore tiny carvings of the Shahada. Most haunting, a child's slate with smudged El Jamiato letters practicing the alphabet alongside Christian hymns. These weren't rebels or saints, just ordinary people clinging to identity under terror. Today, when flamenco singers wail the melancholic Cant Jondo, scholars hear echoes of Moorish liturgical chanting, a subterranean river of memory flowing beneath Spain's official history. The fall of Granada didn't erase 800 years of Al-Andalus, it merely drove its heartbeat underground, where it still pulses in the DNA of a nation forever shaped by the Moors it tried to erase. When the last Moorish ships slipped away from Spanish shores in the early 16th century, their passengers carried more than just shattered dreams. They brought with them the seeds of a diaspora that would reshape the New World in ways textbooks rarely acknowledge. Take the vaqueros of Mexico, those iconic horsemen who became the blueprint for American cowboys. Their distinctive wide-brimmed hats, roping techniques, and even the word lasso trace back to Moorish herders who migrated from Andalusia to the Americas, blending Berber livestock skills with indigenous knowledge. Meanwhile, in the Caribbean, escaped slaves known as Maroons drew their name from the Spanish cimarron, a term originally used for Moorish fugitives hiding in Iberia's mountains. Their guerrilla tactics against colonial powers mirrored the resistance strategies of Morisco rebels half a world away. Shakespeare's Othello stands on a London stage, his dark skin and turban marking him as the ultimate outsider, yet the playwright gives this Moorish general a complexity that defies stereotype. Unlike the mustache-twirling villains of earlier medieval romances, Othello is eloquent, tragic, and deeply human, reflecting Europe's uneasy mix of admiration and fear toward the Islamic world. The real-life counterpart to this fictional figure, Leo Africanus, a Granada-born diplomat captured by pirates and gifted to Pope Leo X. His seminal description of Africa, written in exile, became Europe's go-to geography text for centuries, proof that even in chains, Moorish intellect commanded respect. Listen closely to flamenco's wailing guitars and heel-stamping rhythms, and you'll hear echoes of Moorish Andalusia, the genre's signature duend. That spine-tingling emotional depth stems straight from Arabic makam musical modes, while the lute cradled by Renaissance troubadours evolved from the oud brought by North African musicians. Even the bagpipes of Galicia share DNA with the gaita of Berber shepherds, their haunting drones crossing the Strait of Gibraltar centuries before modern borders existed. The Alhambra Decree of 1492 didn't just expel Jews and Moors, it severed Europe from one of its greatest wellsprings of innovation. Imagine an alternate timeline where tolerance endured. Would Kepler have built on Ibn al-Haytham's optics sooner? Could Spinoza's philosophy have flowered in dialogue with Averro's commentaries? The decree's cruel irony lies in how Spain's golden age, funded by New World gold, coincided with its intellectual decline, as Morisco silk weavers and Jewish doctors took their expertise to Ottoman and Dutch rivals. Spanish castles still whisper with legends of the Rey Moro, a phantom Moorish king said to pace battlements clutching a bloody scimitar. In Sicily, fishermen blame sudden storms on jinn spirits from Arabic folklore absorbed into local superstition. These spectral tales reveal more about European anxiety than history. The dangerous Moor became a convenient villain to justify conquests, from the Reconquista to the colonization of the Americas. Fast forward to Harlem in the 1920s, where black intellectuals like Alain Locke celebrated Moorish Spain as proof of African cultural supremacy. Today, Andalusismo activists lobby for Spanish schools to teach Arabic alongside Castilian, while DNA tests reveal unexpected North African ancestry in families from Louisiana to Liverpool. The line between reclamation and myth-making blurs. Was your ancestor really a Moorish princess, or is that a story spun from wishful thinking? Trowels scrape against medieval mortar in Seville's Santa Clara convent, revealing a stunning secret beneath the plaster. Mihrab arches from a long-forgotten mosque. Similar discoveries ripple across Europe. A cache of Almoravid coins in a Danish bog, a Venetian well containing a 13th-century astrolabe etched with Quranic verses. Each artifact chips away at the old nationalist narrative, proving the Moors weren't just passing invaders but foundational architects of modernity. Why then were they scrubbed from history? The answer lies in 19th-century European museums, where curators labeled Moorish artifacts as Oriental curiosities rather than keystones of Western progress. Colonial powers needed a myth of continuous white Christian supremacy to justify global domination, a lie that crumbles when you realize Copernicus relied on star charts from Cordoba, or that the first university in Europe was founded by a Moorish woman in Salerno. The erasure was never accidental. It was the intellectual equivalent of melting down gold to erase its origins. The legacy of the Moors isn't confined to the ruins of Alhambra or the pages of dusty manuscripts. It lives in the very bones of modern Europe. Every Gothic cathedral's pointed arches, every university lecture on algebra, every sip of coffee from a porcelain cup carries their invisible fingerprints. These weren't just traders of exotic goods or temporary conquerors. They were the missing link between antiquity and the Renaissance, the quiet architects of a world we now call Western. Consider something as ordinary as your morning coffee. The bustling cafes of Vienna, the espresso machines of Italy, none would exist without the Moorish innovation of roasting and brewing coffee beans, a practice they brought from Yemen to the Iberian Peninsula. That citrus grove in Seville, its trees descend from saplings planted by Berber farmers who turned arid land into perfumed orchards. Even the concept of a public hospital with specialized wards and trained physicians traces back to the Bimaristans of Cordoba, where healing wasn't just prayer and luck but science and system. Art tells the same story. The golden halos in Byzantine icons, they borrowed luminosity from Moorish metalwork techniques. Shakespeare's sonnets, their intricate rhyme schemes echo the Muwashsha poetry of Al-Andalus. And that piano in your living room, its ancestor, the Santa, crossed the Mediterranean on Moorish ships, evolving into the harpsichord and later the modern piano. These aren't coincidences, they're cultural DNA, strands of a shared heritage woven into the fabric of what we consider purely European. Yet history, like a careless scribe, has smudged their contributions into obscurity. For centuries, the Moors were painted as villains or footnotes, the other against which Europe defined itself. But peel back the layers and you'll find their influence in the most unexpected places. The legal principles of maritime insurance derived from Islamic trade contracts, the navigational tools that guided Magellan, even the star charts that still bear Arabic names like Betelgeuse and Vega. So the next time you stroll past a cathedral-stained glass or bite into a juicy Valencia orange, pause for a moment. Behind every European tradition, there's often a hidden thread leading back to Damascus, Timbuktu, or Granada. History is rarely as simple as it seems, and the Moors, far from being outsiders, were the quiet co-authors of the world we inhabit today. Their story isn't just a chapter we forgot to read, it's the marginalia annotating every page.